Hey, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to look at Colyseus, which is an open source game state engine. So if you remember in the last video, we spent a little bit of time in Decentraland. So in fact, I'm in Decentraland at the moment, and you can see my avatar wandering around. And one of the things that we discussed in that video is that in order to have a great experience in the metaverse, open source game state engines are going to become important in the future. And the reason that that's going to become important is when you're interacting in the virtual world, it's going to be the same as the physical world. Let's take this example here. I'm in Decentraland at the moment. You see there's two other avatars in front of my avatar, and they are going to have a conversation. They're having an interaction. And you can see there's things like NFTs sitting on the screen. And as you saw a little bit earlier on the screen there, they were having a chat. And therefore, as part of that experience, you want to be able to have a shared experience by all participants in that virtual world or in that virtual room. So that means if you're in a room, what you look at, they look at as well. So if we were looking at this NFT there, we should all see the same NFT. And if you're having a conversation, you need that conversation to go back and forward between each other in the room and everybody able to see the conversation at the same time. So as when you saw those two folks talking there and you saw the speech bubble come up, then actually in that particular case, if there's 4 or 5 people looking at it, they should all be saying the same text, the same conversation at the same time. Just like if you were in the real world and somebody was overhearing a conversation, you would want to overhear that. And that doesn't matter whether it's text or whether it's audio. So that's kind of what Colyseus does well. In fact, what game engines do well in general is they have that ability to be able to broadcast and listen and track game state and be able to do that in a fast and authoritative fashion. And that's exactly what Colyseus does. So what we're going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how to get started with Colyseus. We'll get it installed in our machine, and then we will have some basic interactions. In fact, what we're going to do is almost build like a kind of almost like a social terminal experience. So what we will do is we'll build a terminal, we'll type into the terminal, and then that will be broadcast to all participants. And hopefully you can see with that example in Decentraland how that same example that we're building could be taken into something like Decentraland and used to power those very same experiences. So with that being said, let's get started and let's fire up our editor and get going. Okay, so first things first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create myself a new Colyseus server. So we'll just create a new directory. We'll call it hello Colyseus. We'll just cd into that for a second. And then what I'm going to do is just do an npm init so that I can get my package JSON all set up. So we'll just return all the way through that. And as you can see, we now have our node server created. So the next thing that I need to do is I want to install Colyseus into that node.js server. So to do that, I'm just going to type in npm install Colyseus, and I'm going to save that as my package JSON dependencies. So we'll just do that, and it'll take a few seconds to get that installed. So now that's installed, if I just do an ls there, you can see I've got a package.json and a package JSON. So what I will now do is just open that up in Visual Studio Code, and then you can see what it looks like. So we'll just type in code dot, which will open up the current directory in Visual Studio Code. So next thing that I'm going to do is I want to be able to use ES6 modules rather than common JS. So I'm just going to change my package JSON so it will support ES6 modules by default. And I do that by just typing in type module. Cool. Next thing that I want to do is I'm going to create myself a bare bones Colyseus server. Now, it's going to be fairly bare bones in that sense, so I'm not going to put it under Express just yet. It's just going to be a standalone server, and then later on we'll convert that into an Express server so that we can share our web application. But for just now, I'm just going to fire it up as a bare bones server. So to do that, I am just going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it server.js. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a brand new server, a brand new Colyseus server. I'm going to listen on port 3000. And by the way, underneath the hood, what actually happens is it creates a WebSocket interface. So I'm basically going to create a WebSocket interface on port 3000, and I'm going to create a new game engine server, right? And once I've created that new game engine server, what I want to do is create a room within that server. So like you saw in Decentraland, Colyseus underneath the hood has this concept of rooms. So think of a room like a chat room or a game room or something like that. So anybody that's in the room can participate in the conversation or listen to the conversation. It's kind of like a channel in that sense. And I'm just going to create a room that can be attached to. So to do that, the first thing I need to do is I need to import some of the modules that I need from the colyseus package. So I'm just going to type in import, and specifically I want access to the server module and the room module, and I'm going to get that from colyseus. So we'll just type that in there. And we will hit save. Now, next thing that I want to do is I want to listen on port 3000, but of course, I want to be able to change that as well. So we will just say configure port. And we'll have a constant called port, and then we will access process.env.port. And then if that's not available, we will use 3000 by default. And now what we need to do is create our game server. So in this case, we'll have a game server. We'll call it we'll make it a constant. We'll call it game server, and it's going to be of we're going to instantiate basically the server class. So that is us got our game engine up and running. As I said, what we need to do is create a room. In this case, I'm going to create the room and I'm going to call it Chris Hay UK. So we will say create a room called Chris Hay UK. So to do that, what we will do is we will call the define method. So you can see all the list of options there. You've got define, listen, etc. Sitting underneath that. We are going to use define, so because we're going to define a room. And as you can see, the options there, so it's looking for a name of a room. So we will just say, in this case, it's Chris Hay UK. And then as you see, there's it's got a thing called a handler, and it's expecting a type of room. So that's fine. We are going to want a room in this case. So we'll do that. And then we will open that up to listen. So we will just do game server dot listen. And we want to listen on the port that we defined, which in this case is going to be port 3000. So we will just say port. And that is the basics of getting our server up and running. So if I were to now go back to our terminal for a second, and we were to type in node.server.js, you will see it's now listening on port 3000. So as you can imagine, a server that has no client is no use. And what we said before is we were going to create a little terminal, which essentially the terminal would connect to the room, and anything we typed in the terminal then would be broadcast to any other terminals attached to that room as well. So to do that, we are going to use a tool called xterm.js. Now, if you've never heard of xterm.js, it is basically a web terminal. Now, funnily enough, the terminal that I use here, if you look there, you can see it's called Hyper. And actually underneath the hood, Hyper is using xterm.js to power my Hyper terminal. So every video that you've watched on my channel, you will realize xterm.js actually powers the underlying experience because I use Hyper as my main terminal. Okay, so to do that, what I need to do is just do an npm install of xterm. Again, I'll do -- save on that so that it gets installed. And now that xterm is installed, what I'm going to do now is go back into Visual Studio Code. And then what I will do is we'll just create an index.html file. We'll create a little HTML file that is going to bring up the terminal. As part of xterm, I need to import a style sheet. So we'll just do link rel equals style sheet. And the style sheet that we want to import at this stage is going to come from node modules, and it's going to be underneath here in xterm, and then you will see under CSS, and there's an xterm CSS file. So that's the one that we want to use. You know, of course, in a longer video, etc., you could use Webpack or ESBuild to do all the bundling, etc. But for laziness sake at the moment, I'm just going to use this directly. So we'll type in node modules, xterm, CSS, and xterm.css. Okay, so now that we've got our style sheet in, next thing we want to do is import some JavaScript, and of course that's very similar. So we're going to pull that from node_modules again. It's going to come from xterm, and it is going to be lib, and it's going to be called xterm.js. Next thing I want to do is just create a body very quickly. So in this case, we will have a div, and we're going to give that the idea of terminal. Basically, this is where we're going to put our terminal on the screen. So we'll leave that div open there, and then I'm just going to create a little script which will essentially fire up the terminal. So in this case, we'll have a term called var term equals new terminal. That's fine. And then, as always, I use the font hack. So, just to make my terminal look cool, I am going to set my font family to hack. Now, I didn't obviously need to do that, but, I want to make it as close to as normal. So I'm going to call it, I'm going to use the hack font. Okay, so now that I've got my terminal created, next thing I need to do is just open that up. So I'll do a term.open, and then what I'm going to do is pass it the div that we just created, because that's where we want that to be. So we'll just get element by ID, and we'll pass in terminal, which is the terminal that we created up here. Once that's open, we will just do a write. So term.write, what that does is just writes out to the terminal. So in this case, I want it to write out Chris Hay UK. And then it will look like the terminal that you are used to seeing. So now that that's done, we can actually just fire it up very quickly. So if I were to type in npx http server, so you'll have seen that in my other videos. The HTTP server is a node.js package which allows you just to fire up a web server very quickly. So if I type in that, it will just create a web server underneath there. So you can see it's created a web server called 127.0.180.80. So if I click on that for a second, and then you can see on my screen, I've got a terminal, and it's written out Chris Hay UK there. Now, of course, I can't type anything in at the moment because I haven't put any handlers to support key presses or anything like that. But you can see it's written out Chris Hay UK, and that's what we're going to use to hook up to Colyseus. So the idea is, as we type into that terminal, then that data is going to be pushed across the WebSocket, across to our Colyseus server, and then it would be broadcast to any other clients that connect to that same room. So that is what we're going to do next. So if you think about this for a second, I've got two things going on now. I've got my Colyseus server, which is a WebSocket server, which is listening in port 3000. And I need my web server as well, which is on port 8080 to serve up the terminal. So if you think about the example that I had, I fired up the game engine manually by itself, and then I use HTTP server to host my web server. Ideally, especially because of things like chorus, etc., one of the things I really want to be able to do is take my web server that I'm hosting on 8080 and use the same server to host my WebSocket server, i.e. my Colyseus game engine. So I need to combine the two things into one. And what I'm going to do there is I'm going to use Express to be able to do that. And the way I do that is essentially by using middleware of Express to host the game engine server. And then I can use the static capability of Express to hold static pages, which will host my HTML page. So what we're now going to do is we're going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and we're essentially going to change our Colyseus game engine server so that it can host our web page and host the WebSocket server using middleware. So let's go back to Visual Studio Code, and now we'll go back into our server.js. So the next thing that I'm going to need to do here is, as you can probably imagine, is I want to bring in Express. So I'm going to do an import Express from Express. So we'll just do that for a second. And I think what we will do in the first case is we'll set up the Express app, and then we will convert Colyseus so it can be hosted by Express, and then we will do the hosting of our static pages. So I've got my import from Express. Now, of course, as it stands at this point in time, I have not installed Express, so I need to do that. So I'll do an npm install Express. We'll do a save. So that will take a second, and that will now be a package dependency. So now that that's done, so what we'll do here is we'll create a new app, and we'll say app equals Express. And it gives me an Express app there. So the two things that I want to be able to do in this case is enable cores, and I also want to support Express JSON as well. So let me just do an import cores from cores. So that will mean I can do that, and then I will just do a app.use cores. And that sets me up for cores, and then we'll do the same so that we have JSON as our default response here. So we'll just do that. So that's our middleware set up. And then the next thing that I need to do, if you remember, I created this Colyseus server. Next thing that I need to do is I need to hook up my Colyseus server up to Express. So the way that we can do that is Colyseus has the ability to use Express in the transport layer. So to do that, what we need to do is expand out the options in this server here. And then you will see there is something called transport. So we can just open that up there for a second. And then what transport is expecting us to provide is a WebSocket transport. So we'll just type that in, WebSocket transport. And what you will see there is nothing's coming up at the moment because I haven't imported that. So what I will do is just import WebSocket transport from @colyseus /WS transport. Okay. Now, if we come back into that, we can see it's all nicely set up there. And then it allows us to see our options. So if we then look at the options there, if I just do this, we can see that there is a server option, and that is essentially what we are wanting to do. What we want to be able to do is take that server there as part of the transport and then say, associate the underlying server with Express, and that will allow Express to host a WebSocket server. So to do that, I'm just going to say I want to create an HTTP server, HTTP. Now, as you can see, I have already not included HTTP there, so I need to do another import. So I'll do import HTTP from HTTP, and we'll just save that. And then what I can now do is do an http.create server, and then I can pass through my app. Now, if I save that, that will mean that Express is now able to host that game engine for myself. So just to kind of prove that for a second, if I now do a node server.js, what you're going to see, there's an error there because I obviously haven't installed cores. So if I do an import npm install -- save cores, and then we'll do a node server.js, and you can see we're now back up and running. So Express is now hosting my server. So the next thing that I needed to do here, if you remember, is what I wanted to do is host index.html in my HTTP server on 8080. So what I'm going to do now, create myself a new folder. I'm going to call it public. And then what I'm going to do is move the index.html into the public folder. So that will now be there. And then what I can now do is within my server.js is I can essentially use the static capability to host that public folder. So what I will do now is set up the public folder, and we'll do an app.use. So we'll use a little bit of middleware again, and we'll say express.static, and we want to basically serve up anything within the public folder. So that will be good for us, and then we will save this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to fire up my server, and it will now be hosting our HTML page. So we'll just type in node server.js, and then I've come to my browser and I type up localhost 3000. So you can see it's serving my page, but I'm obviously not getting my terminal. And the reason I'm not getting my terminal is because I haven't got my node modules being served up at the moment. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fix that up. So we'll come back into Visual Studio Code for a second. I'm going to come back to my index.html. So rather than messing around with bundlers, etc., what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take out the node modules xterm, and then I'm going to use unpackaged.com. And you can see I'm using xterm 418, so I'll just pull the CSS and the JavaScript from the internet for just now, and I'll do the same for my JavaScript. So we'll just paste that in here, and if I save that, and now if I go back into Brave and do localhost 3000, you will see it's now serving up my web page, and I'm hosting the WebSocket server at the same time. So that's pretty cool. So we've solved our first problem, which is we're hosting our WebSocket server, our colyseus engine, and we're hosting our web page at the same time. So the second thing that I want to be able to do now is I want to connect the two things up together so that when I type on xterm here, then that is going to get published to our colyseus game engine. So to do that, the first thing that I really need to do is establish a connection, i.e. I need to join the room. So what I need to do is essentially open up a WebSocket connection and join the room. So let's do that. So let's go back into Visual Studio Code. And in order to interact with colyseus, we actually need to use the colyseus JavaScript client. So I need to import some more JavaScript. So we'll just do script type equals text JavaScript. And then we're going to set the source is equal to, in fact, what we will do is we will use unpackaged.com again, and we will set that to colyseus.js. And I'm going to use version 0.14.0. And then we're going to pull colyseus.js. Okay, so I've now got the colyseus JavaScript there. And the first thing I want to do now, as I said before, is even before I start typing stuff, I just want to connect to the underlying game engine server. So nothing more complicated than that. So to do that, we'll just write some code after the opening of the terminal. So in this case, what we will do is we'll have a URL. So we'll say const URL is equal to, and we'll open up to our WebSocket connection, which is going to be on localhost 3000. So that's WS localhost 3000. And then we want to set what our room name is. So we'll just say room name is equal to Chris Hay UK. If you remember, that's what we created. And then to do that connection, all we really need to do is we'll actually write out to the terminal first of all. So we'll just, so that we know we're doing some sort of connecting. So we'll say, connecting to $URL. And then the next thing that we will do is we'll create our colyseus client. So we'll just say var client equals new colyseus.client, and we will pass in the URL. So we will just save that. And then once we've established a connection, what we want to be able to do is join the room. So we will just write out to the terminal again using the term.write line. So we will just say joining, and we'll pass in the room name. So if you remember, the room name was called room name, and we'll just close that out again. And once we've written to the terminal, we will use the client, and it's going to be join or create. And we are going to pass in the room name. So we'll just put a room name. And then once that's connected, we will put a nice little arrow function in here to say, once you've established a connection there, just write out to the terminal the Chris Hay UK prompt. So in fact, we will just take that here and pass that in. So let's do that. And we'll get rid of this bit here. So just before we run that code, I'm just going to walk through again what it does. So we're going to open up our terminal. And then what we're going to do is using the Colyseus client, we're going to establish a WebSocket connection. So that connection is at WS localhost 3000. And then what we're going to do is we're going to attempt to join the room Chris Hay UK. So, and we do that by calling client.join or create, passing in the room name. And then once we've joined the room name, we're just going to put up on at the terminal Chris Hay UK. So if we can't make a connection to the backend server, it's not going to display Chris Hay UK. Maybe what I could do here is, just so you know the difference, we'll write Chuck there in that particular case. So if I just refresh that, you can see it's saying connecting to WebSocket localhost 3000. It's attempting to join room name. So I've obviously messed up that code there. Let's look back at this. Joining, oh, yep, I have. So let's put that the other way around. Refresh. So joining Chris Hay UK, and then you can see it came back with Chuck. And if I was to look at the developer tools there for a second, let's look at network and we'll do a refresh. And you can see there's a local host. It's pulling xterm.js, then it's pulling the colyseus JavaScript. And then as you can kind of see, if we just expand that out a little bit, it's attempting to make a WebSocket connection here. WebSocket localhost 3000, passing in a session ID. So it's actually making those physical connections. So good news is now what we've got is a terminal that is on my screen, and I've made a connection to the underlying room. And if I come back into Hyper for a second, so you see my node server.js. So as it stands at the moment, I'm not given any feedback on that server, so I don't know that if any connections are being made. So if I want, I can extend that server so that when connections are made from the client, then we can log out some stuff as well. So let's do that. What we'll do is we'll stop our server for a second, and we're going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to come back into server.js. Now, really what I want to do is, if you remember before, at the moment I'm just using a generic room. But in order for me to start doing things like when a server is connected or somebody joins a chat room, I want to log something out, then really I need to define something new. I need a new type to be able to handle that. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new class called chat room, which is going to extend that room class. So I'm no longer going to use this default room class. So I will have a chat room, a brand new class, which is going to be derived from that room base class. And then what I will do is extend a couple of the methods to log out to the console. So let me show you how that works. So we will create a new file and we'll call it chatroom.js, which is fine. And then I'm going to do that import room from Colyseus like I did before. So from Colyseus. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is create a class. So we'll just do an export default class. And we'll call it chat room, and that's going to extend room. Okay, so that's our new class called chat room, which is extending the room base class, and then that's going to be exported out as the default. And then what I can do is essentially extend the onCreate method. So what we can then say is, whenever something is created, I just want to log out what happened. So we'll just say chat room created. And I don't need anything from the options, but I will pass that through. Okay. And then I'm going to do something similar for the dispose. So whenever a chat room is disposed, then we will do the same thing. And we'll say chat room destroyed. Okay. So I've got my new class there, and then what I now need to go is back to my server, and then rather than passing in a room here, what I want to be able to do is pass in chat room. So I will just put chat room there rather than room, and then all I now need to do is just do import chat room from chatroom.js. Now if we save that, and now if I run node server.js again, we're back up and running. And if I come back into my Brave browser, And this time, let's close that one. If I open up localhost 3000, you can see it saying joining. And then if I come back to my terminal, you can see it says chat room created. And if I did this again, if I opened up another tab, let's do a localhost 3000, you can see it's not calling chat room created because it's joined the same chat room. So let's kill that. So if we kill this, nothing happened because the chat room still exists. But of course, now if I destroy this one, we'll keep that open. But if I destroy this, then the chat room should be destroyed because there's nothing else connected to the chat room. And when there's nothing connected to the chat room, it should destroy. So I've now closed the tab, and then you can see chat room is destroyed. And if I was to call localhost 3000 again, you can see chat room created again. So I've got this connection now. My Colyseus server is now responding. So anytime the Chris Hay UK chat room's created, you'll get the chat room created, and every time it's destroyed, you'll get the destroyed. So we've got the handling of creating and destroying a chat room, but actually the next thing that you would be interested in is understanding when somebody both joins or leaves a room. So if you remember, in that previous example there, I opened up multiple tabs, but of course it only said chat room created for the first tab. The second tab that I opened when somebody else joined the room, it didn't do anything, right? Because the room was already created. So what we'll do is now extend that chat room code so that we can log out whenever somebody joins or leaves the room. So let's do that for a second. So we'll come back into chatroom.js, and this time we'll handle the on join and the on leave. So first thing we'll do is we'll just log it out, and then we'll extend it like we did before. But maybe what we will do is after we see it logging out to the console is we'll maybe send a message to other participants. So let me just copy that. So you could probably imagine what the on join, what happens when somebody joins a room, right? So in here it was on create when you create a room, dispose, on dispose when you dispose of a room. So you can kind of guess what's going to happen when you join a room. It's going to be on join, and then similar for when you leave a room, it's going to be on leave. So in this case, chat room. What I want to do in this case though is I really want to capture. We'll just change that to client there for a second. So what we'll do is we'll just output the session ID of the client. So to do that, we'll just type in $client.session ID, and then we'll say joined the room, and then we'll pass. Don't need that. What we'll then now do is take this, pass that into here, and we'll say left the room. So now if we come back to our terminal, we'll call that, we'll restart it. And now if we'll just close that for a second. Now if we do localhost 3000, so we've got somebody who's joined the room, and then let's add another person to the room. So we've got two people joining the room, and you can now see client RC whatever joined the room, client A6 joined the room, and I can do another one as well. Let's pass that in, and you can see client whatever joined the room. And then of course if I start closing them off, client MJ left the room. I could get rid of this one here. So this was the first one, so close that, and you can see client RC left the room. And then finally, if we close that here, you can see the final client, the middle one, left the room, and then the chat room was destroyed. Okay, so that's pretty cool. We can capture when somebody joins and leaves the room now. But actually, one of the things that we might want to be able to do is let other participants of the chat room know that somebody has joined or left the room. So how would I do that? Well, to do that, I need to broadcast a message. So what I will do in this case is I'm going to use the this.broadcast, and that will basically mean that you can broadcast to anyone who's part of that room. And I'm going to broadcast a message, and I can set that to whatever I want, but I'm going to say message in this case. And then I just pass through what the message I want to broadcast is. So in this case, I think I will just take the exact same message that we used over here. So client whatever joined the room. In fact, we'll get rid of the client, so it's just that bit. And then we will do the same for on leave. So we'll just put that down here. and this time client whatever left the room. So that will now broadcast that message out to anybody who's listening. But of course, I'm going to have to change my HTML code so that it can deal with the reception of that message. So let's come back into our index.html a second. And if you remember, we had our code here, which is for join or create. And that is where I'm going to have to extend this. So to extend that, what I want to be able to do is essentially say is once I've joined that room, that anytime I receive a message, and I can set it to whatever type of message, then you can do whatever you want with it. So in this case, we had a message of message. And what we're going to want to do is whenever we receive that, just write it out to the terminal. So that's fine. So what we're going to do here is just type in room.onMessage. And it's of anything of type message. And then I'm using the word message an awful lot here, but that's fine. We'll have an arrow function. So whenever we receive a message, then what we want to do is write to the terminal using term.writeLine. And whatever message you received, we're going to write out to the terminal. So essentially, you're going to receive that message coming in, which is the thing we broadcast. And then whenever that comes in, just write out whatever you received to the terminal. So let's come back to our node.js server. We'll start it back up. So we'll come back into our browser. We'll type in localhost 3000, and you can see OXAW joined the room. So it's even accepting when I join the room myself, right? So now if I go into localhost 3000 again, you can see this person joined the room, i.e. I joined the room. And then now the first tab is notified that somebody joined the room. You can see I've joined the room here. This one's notified that 3C's joined the room, which is this dude over here. And then, of course, that first tab has found out the other person has joined the room. And then, of course, the same happens when you leave the room. And then finally, you can see this tab there says, yeah, they've left the room. So we'll just finally close this one and they're gone. And if I go back to my terminal, you can see that sequence of people leaving the room until the chat room is destroyed. So now I can start to message. Not only can I write things out to the server, but I can send messages back and forward. So just before we move on to the next stage, I'm hoping you're starting to see how useful this is, right? Because what I've now got is I'm using this game engine to manage state for the room, right? So I have a chat room. I can send messages back and forward, right? Using the onMessage handler and the broadcast method. So I can send messages to the backend server, back and forward, and I can communicate with anyone in the room. That could be a chat. If you think of that decentraland example, that was essentially 3 people in the room. There was 2 people talking, and then there was myself who was observing, and it was coming up with a message on the screen. Using something like Colyseus is exactly how you would implement that, right? So person A is talking to person B, they sent a message, but everybody in the room can see that message via the broadcast. And then in that particular case, the message was going to be written up to that screen. So that's exactly how that works, and that's why in the metaverse and in platforms such as Decentraland, things like Colyseus is going to be an absolute key part of these metaverse-based solutions, because everybody needs to be aware of game state across the world. And when I say game state in this case, I'm not really meaning as in games, I'm meaning as in worlds, right? So, or verses. So this is going to be a key thing for digital platforms. And again, I go into this more detail in my other video, but so go check that out. But I'm hoping you're starting to see that this is probably a very key capability. So far we've handled creation of rooms, destructions of rooms, joining rooms, and leaving rooms. Last thing I want to be, I'm broadcasting messages between when you join or leave a room. Last thing I want to do now is switch off some of that functionality and have the ability for the terminal to be able, for somebody to be able to type on a terminal, and then whoever is connected to that room to receive those events. So what I'm going to do in this case is I'm going to comment out this stuff here for a second, because I don't want to be broadcasting whenever somebody joins or leaves the room. But what I want to be able to do now is allow the chat room to be able to receive incoming messages and then broadcast those messages on to all other connected clients. So let me show you how that works. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to have the this.onMessage. So basically what this is saying, so when we create a room, what we want to be able to do is hook up the any incoming messages of type message, and then what we're going to do is then broadcast that on to everybody else. So we will just put in client data, and this is a nice little arrow function here, and then we'll do a this.broadcast just like we did before when we joined a room, and then we will say of message, and it's going to be of data. So essentially, whenever you receive a message of type message, then all you're going to do is broadcast that on. So that's essentially what's happening. So this is going to give us this kind of social terminal or social room type thing. And now what we need to do is basically change our terminal client to be able to deal with that. If we look at our HTML file as it stands, we've already got this capability. So we obviously write out chuck as we did before, and then our terminal has got the ability of whenever a message is received, then it will automatically write that out. So if we think about it, all we essentially need to do is essentially accept any input from the client, so whatever somebody types, and then send that along the WebSocket, i.e. do a kind of a send of that message. So to do that, the first thing I want to do is I'm just going to make the old cursor blink a little bit, because it's going to be nice to have a little blinking cursor. So we'll just type in term.setOption cursor blink. We're going to set that to true, so that will give us a nice blinking cursor. And then what I'm going to do is on data, so whenever we receive, i.e. whenever we type in the terminal, so whenever it receives data, what we're going to do is take that and then pass that across the WebSocket to Colyseus. So what we're going to do now is, what we need to do is accept any data from the keyboard into the terminal. So anytime any data, anytime somebody types on the keyboard, we want to take that and send that along the WebSocket. So to do that, we will use the term.onData, which basically is meaning, it's basically a listener for any incoming data, i.e. Keyboard events. And then we're going to pass that into a new arrow function. And all we're going to do is do a send. Yeah, so we will send to the message channel as we did before, and we will pass the data, i.e. anything that's typed on the keyboard. So if you think about this logically for a second, right, we've got a blinking cursor. We've got a terminal that's listening for any incoming data, in this case, typing on the keyboard, and it's going to take that data and then it's going to send it onto the room on the message channel. And then, of course, over here, we've also got, on receiving a message, then it's going to write that to the terminal. On the back end on the server, if you remember, any incoming on messages. So if we come back into chat room for a second, anytime a message comes in, then it's going to broadcast to the message channel. So what should happen is that anybody who's connected to this terminal should be receiving the same thing. So now, if I fire up my node.js server and connect my tabs, it should mean that anything I type on one terminal should be then published to all other tabs. Let's test this out. So what we will now do is go back into our terminal. We'll type in node-server.js. Our terminal's up and running, and then we'll open up Brave. We'll go localhost 3000, localhost 3000, localhost 3000. We'll have 4 tabs, localhost 3000. So we should be in a nice position. We've got a chat room created. Remember, I've stopped logging out whenever somebody joins. So now if I type hello world, that's probably not a great way of typing that, but let's see what happens. And then you've got hello world, hello world, hello world. So that's kind of working. Maybe what I want to do is, rather than type in a right line there, let's just turn that into a right. And then we will, let's close that out. And I think we'll do this one more time. Do localhost 3000, 3000, 3000, and it should look a little bit more humane this time. Hello world, and then if I go to 3000, you can see it's got the hello world. But of course, what's cool about this is I can type in this as well. My name And you can see that's got it and that's got it. And then I can say is, and come back to here, Chris. And if I want to, I can see how fast the latency is. So let's do this again. So what we'll do is we'll open up a couple of windows. We'll put these side by side. We'll open up localhost 3000 here. We'll open up localhost 3000 here. And then we'll go, let's do it from here. Hello. So you can see this is pretty fast, right? And of course I'm running on my local machine, but you know, it's still pretty fast. From Chris, hey, UK. And now I've got this sort of social experience between the two. So of course I could take it off my local machine. I could maybe host this on something like Google Cloud Run. In fact, you can check out my videos on Google Cloud Run and to see how to do that. But that would just be a matter of packaging up a Docker image on there, put it on something like Google Cloud or AWS or any cloud. You can host it up there, and then you can have that running on the internet. But as you can kind of see, there's a social experience there. Now, of course, as I said, I think this is going to be underpinning for things like the metaverse, because you can have these sort of interactive experiences. But you can imagine non-metaverse associated things, right? You can imagine this being like a common terminal for the entire world. Maybe you would want to do some social coding type experiences, you know, and you want a shared terminal, or maybe you want to have people view what you type in a terminal and broadcast everything. You could do that as well. So there's kind of a social coding element. There is obviously metaverse and game server type use cases. But as you can see, I think Colyseus is a super, super powerful piece of technology. And I think technology such as Colyseus is going to be really important as we start to build metaverse-based solutions. Anyway, I hope this video has been useful. I hope it's a tool you will have fun playing with and enjoying. And I will catch you in the next video.